Hey there! So you're wondering how the heck did I get into this game called BitCraft, where I'm a freaking weird little soulless looking humanoid. Alright, I have a couple tips for you. First tip is obviously if you press U, you'll be able to see where stuff is. But the bigger tip that I think really kind of flies over everyone's head is that you want to get the wagon almost immediately, as quick as possible in the game. How do you do this, you may wonder? Well, basically you want to go out, pick up sticks, alright, right out of the gate, and then you want to go out, find somewhere outside in the map, you want to press B and go get a terraforming dig site. And you cannot do this while you're in the city, so you've got to be out there a ways, right? But once you're out there, go ahead and dig until you get to construction level 20. Then all you need to do really is manipulate the market. How do you manipulate the market, you may wonder? Pretty straightforward. I mean, basically you just go to your ruined town market and you can do one of two things for money making. You can either A, find demand, which is typically in the traveler task items, which if you're wondering, how do I jump between item to item? Literally, you can click on traveler task, click on this item here, and you can scroll through and look at all the different tasks that are required. These items that are required for the traveler tasks are typically the items that you want to sell on the market, because these will usually sell pretty darn fast, especially if you're meeting or under the cost of the task itself. People will very quickly look at that and say, oh yeah, well if I bought a timber I could pay 90, say 98, 97, and I'm gonna get 3 coin back. Obviously everybody's in their dog will buy that, and you know, it's just easy peasy logic. But that's what I recommend as far as going about getting the capital you need in the beginning. The second bit is, you know, okay, what do I professionally want to work on in terms of professions? I'm of the opinion that you can do this in any way you wish, but you do want to pick effectively one or two that you want to focus in on. I happen to be a masonry main, but what I usually jump between is foraging, forestry, mining, and smithing. And the reason for this is because basically in masonry you're gonna find you're gonna need timber in order to make bricks, which means you're gonna need a high forestry. You're gonna need foraging to get clay, so conveniently you need forestry. Mining, because obviously in order to get the shale to be able to even get the darn bricks in the first place, you gotta have mining. And then masonry is just the act of actually making the bricks themselves, right? And then you're also limited to the actual kilns, smelters, or looms that you make that stuff in. So one common mistake I see a lot of people make is that they'll start in the starter towns and they'll just make the assumption that I should just make all my stuff in the starter town kiln. Don't do this. What you really ought to do is look for somewhere on the map for a player town. Like, for example, there's Port Taverna. There are lots of different towns out there, but primarily you want to look for player-built towns, because the benefit of doing that, right, is that you can then turn around and they will have multiple kilns, multiple smelters, multiple, like, the point I'm getting across to you is that you're only limited by what the restriction is in the actual kiln itself, and not so much what it actually has to offer. So if you want to expedite the amount of time that it takes you to actually make the items and not actually have to be dependent on the amount of time it takes for the kiln to actually cook said item, you want more kilns to be able to do that. The same also applies for looms if you're making cloth, or the same logic applies for smelters if you're molting ingots. Okay, same logic, same everything. But ultimately, you want to follow demand. That is ultimately what's going to decide where profit needs to be made. That is to say, if you are wanting to mass market yourself and make the most amount of profit possible, you want to look where supply is lowest and demand is highest. Pretty simple dynamics. Third tip, and I think this one kind of floats right over everybody's head, but honestly, if you want to go and grab yourself kind of a plan of attack, like if you want to build a settlement or if you want to do anything, honestly think the easiest way to do this is to basically go over into the town market, and you can exploit the market for what you are doing at the time. So like, for example, certain items every once in a while will be really low in relation to at least what they're worth. So once in a while, like, you know, I'll see like, oh yes, an axe. Okay. You know, you can buy your items and get yourself ahead a little bit faster if you know this because ultimately, if you know that, oh, I'm going to do this and that, you can buy your way through it. But what if you don't have the X coins? Well, then you have to basically grind your way through it. And I would recommend, if you are low on cash in the beginning, you probably ought to just do your traveler tasks, because this will get you that starting capital that you will need to be able to build up to where you can eventually run on your own. And fundamentally, I would say, if anything, you don't necessarily have to jump straight to going to empire building, but you do want to pay attention to your achievements, in part because what you can do is, with these achievement points, you can then grab yourself titles, which then obviously, you know, turns into actual equipment you can wear and stuff, which is kind of a cool little bonus perk of playing the game. But one of the things that I always felt like kind of floats over everybody's head is that, like, for example, if you are wanting to go about, like, say I make a ginormous amount of clay, there are two ways, or two lines of thought here. You could either go to the bank and drop your items in the bank, which, you know, admittedly, you know, if you want more storage and you just happen to have a stupid amount of items that you want to dump in your bank, you can. Or you can do my school of thought, which is, okay, I don't want this many bricks. I have no reason to sit on this inventory. I'm not going to use it. I want to go do this or that or whatever. Then make a sell order for it. Find, you know, demand for it. If you don't plan to actually use it, then turn around and sell it and leave it in the market. There's not any penalization for actually making a bunch of market orders, so therefore you can basically expedite the amount of stuff that you have at any given time and stick it in here. And then if you ever need to go pull it out, you just go back to orders, look for the item in question that you need, edit, and then go ahead and pull it, and then hit, you know, edit sell order, and then claim the remainder. And then you can turn around and basically, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. Because not only are you profiting while it's sitting in the market, but then you're also able to pull it if you, for any reason, need it. So, that said, about the only other thing that you can really find yourself needing more often than not, which, I mean, I will say that if you get through the grind of actually getting a wagon in the beginning, about the only other thing that you could probably dig into that is slept on a ginormous amount, and I think this is something that's unique to the masonry profession, is that if you get a ginormous amount of pebbles, you can actually turn around and use those same pebbles, right? You can use those pebbles when you go to a masonry station to get something called jewelry. And the jewels in this profession are rather lucrative, like in a crazy good way. Like, for example, all right, if I go in here, I can make glass files, and there's tons of profit made on glass files from the standpoint that everybody from refined wood polish to, you know, even the lower tier players are going to find that they're going to need glass. So if you want to just go around and gather sand even, you're probably going to be right for thinking this. But the point I'm getting at with the gems is that what a lot of people sleep on and don't seem to pay any attention to is the fact that the rings actually give you an increase to the speed at which you're doing tasks, an efficiency boost, so to speak. Like if you get the encrusted ring, it's a increase to your gathering and crafting speed across the board. And you can mass produce these. I tend to find that the market is completely sleeping on this. I don't know why, so it is not uncommon to have a mason come in here and sell these for a exuberant amount of money, and people wind up buying it later on because of the fact that, frankly, not enough people are doing it. And I point that out because it seems as though like nobody ever pays any attention to the amount of time that they spend actually crafting, but like, if you actually pay any attention, like if you're going to go gather, wear leather armor. If you're going to be crafting, wear cloth armor. If you're going to go killing things, wear hunter or slayer armor, which is basically like saying wear plate armor. Make the armor at the smithing station and basically build yourself up there. Now, I will say that this game is a collaborative game, so fundamentally my third, fourth, only really meaningful tip here is to actually talk with other players. Find individual people that you can group up with, and if anything, take advantage of existing cities. If you know that, hey, if I go to like Port Taverna, for example, I can get access to 4 different kilns at varying different tiers, you know, tier 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, in fact, even now we're almost up to 5 in that city. You know, you can take advantage of that and then use that in your own crafting tier. and build yourself up. And then conveniently, the players that are also in those towns just conveniently also happen to be selling the resources that you may or may not need. So you tend to find that if you are going to get very far in this game, you are going to be dependent on the other people around you. And it's, collaborative for that reason, right? Outside of that, though, if you want to maximize, and I really think this is more in my fifth tip than anything, and I feel like it's also kind of slept on a fair bit, is the moment you get every 10 levels, assume that you're up a tier. So like at 40, I can already presumably go out of my way now to go look for a tier 4 chisel now, if I wanted to. And, if you want to maximize the amount of time that it takes you to do, say, tier 1 items, well, then obviously you want to get to the highest tier item and continuously build up on that. Obviously, yes, if you're going to do 10, 20, 30k stacks of it, and then turn around and sell it for a profit, you can then turn that hex coin that you've just now made into a profit to get your, the equipment you may need for a new wagon, a skiff, what have you. But to me, that is the way to approach the game. It is so much easier to do that than it is to try and gather and do all of that for yourself than it is to be the guy that is the mumbo jumbo good guy at everything, which I'll admit, I've kind of built around that idea at first, and I did get pretty far to where I was level 20 in foraging and also in smithing and masonry, and I was working my way to leathering and eventually farming, and it's a little too much. Like, the amount of time just to get to where I'm at right now has taken a little over 20 to 30 hours. But it's not incredibly unrealistic to see yourself getting to where you could actually consistently play this game at a reasonable level. Now, I will say that a large chunk of this game is spent on what I would amount to as waiting. You wait on a lot of timers, so you're gonna sit around and do a whole lot of nothing while you're waiting. And so during those times, I would recommend, at least in my opinion, the sixth tip is I would grab or at least spend some of that time actually getting stuff into kilns, smelters, what have you, so that you're not actually wasting that time while you're crafting. Like, if you know that, oh, hey, this kiln's done, go out of your way to go get that kiln started, so that way you're always constantly getting something out of your time. Because otherwise, all this time that you may be spending on, say, doing masonry may also be, used elsewhere that you could come and turn around and use some other time, and so like here I could make rough gem assessments if I wanted to, but for the fragments for that matter, but there's no reason to. But ultimately, my only other suggestion is for a large number of people that are wanting fertilizer, go gather berries. Level 1 berries are super easy to turn straight into fertilizer. If you want food, I recommend you either go out and you grab, you can do it in one of two ways, but honestly I think the easiest profession for food is fishing. Outside of probably going around and killing the sag-eye birds in the beginning just to get the pelts that you can then turn around and use for leather. And leather has a pretty high premium in the tier 3 to tier 4 range. So for those of you that are wanting to strictly go into the hunting or cloth professions, those both are going to have their own set of benefits. It's just like anything though, like timber has its benefits, masonry has its benefits. That's the benefit of picking a profession. You can either be a leather worker and make good money leathering in tier 3, tier 4. Same could be said for cloth. Same could be said for masonry. Same could be said for smithing. It's all just in the scheme of whatever it is that you want to focus on. And the faster you focus on maybe one or two, the faster you are going to get to high profit. And even at low tier items, I tend to find that you will find that you can get a pretty reasonable amount of money started just in the small towns. But one of the things that I do recommend, and this is something that you always want to kind of have on your mind, is that you want to pay attention to what is going on at any given time. So if, for example, I don't generally like to sell in cities that have less than 200 listings. Cities that have less than 200 listings don't tend to have a ginormous amount of traffic. And so therefore you don't want to usually bother selling in those cities. However, cities like Port Taberna, for example, have nearly 400. So there's a ginormous amount of traffic going through there. And so that market's always going to have a consistent amount of sellers and buyers to basically compete with. Now, I will say that for a large chunk of time that you're going to be spending doing your gathering and such, you'll also want to probably get at least 10 to 20 of meat at any given time. That way you can always, you know, basically stop, start, restart whenever you need to. Makes things a heck of a lot easier. Outside of that, though, at least in my experience so far, getting the wagon is probably the most challenging thing I would say that you will spend in the early game. When you finally get to the wagon, though, everything gets substantially easier when you're trying to work on a single profession, because now you don't have to do so many trips back and forth. You can pretty much get there, do as many gathering in that item profession that you want, come back, mass produce, and profit. And it gets a lot easier if you build your own town, and even the nitty-gritty of going through all of that is a whole different video on it of itself. But hopefully this was helpful for you, and I will see you guys next time.